רק שנייה.
אתם יכולים לשתף מסך.
כן, יופי.
Hi, hello.
היי, זהבית, יופי.
We need that someone will give us a share screen.
יש לכם, זהבית, יש לכם.
הכל בסדר, אתם יכולים להתחיל.
אבל תשימו ספוטלייט על זהבית וקרול.
כן, זהבית שמתי, נחפש רק את קרול.
Hi, hello, Professor Carol Lee. We would like to ask to give us the permission of share screen.
Zavit, you have a share screen. You can show your PowerPoint.
Okay. So we are going to start. Good afternoon and welcome to the special keynote address of our distinguished guest, Professor Carol Lee. My name is Professor Zehavit Gross, and I'm the chairholder of a UNESCO Chair for Values Education, Tolerance and Peace in the School of Education, Bar-Ilan University. Good morning, Professor Carol Lee. We appreciate very much your effort to be with us in this early time in the morning. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, let me first introduce briefly my friend and colleague, Professor Carol Lee. Then we will listen to the keynote address of Professor Carol Lee, and then we will have short time for Q&A. Carol Lee is the Edwina Terry Professor Emerita in the School of Education and Social Policy and African American Studies at North Southern University. She is president of the National Academy of Education at the USA, past president of the American Educational Research Association, AERA, AERA's past representative to the World Educational Research Association, past vice president of Division G of AERA, past president of the National Conference on Research in Language and Literacy, and past co-chair of the Research Assembly of the National Council of Teachers of English. She is a member of the National Academy of Education, a fellow of the American Educational Research Association, the National and the International Society of the Learning Sciences, a former fellow at the Center for Advanced Studies in the Behavioral Sciences, a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the Reading Hall of Fame. She has received numerous awards, including distinguished contributions to the education from the ARA, the McGrew Prize in Education, the Square Award, and the Distinguished Service Award from the National Council of Scholar Teachers of English, Scholars of Color Distinguished Scholar Award from the American Educational Research Association, the Distinguished Alumni Award from the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Illinois, Urbana, the President's Award from the American Association of Blacks in Higher Education, the Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Association of College and Teacher Education, and an honorary doctorate from the University of Pretoria, South Africa. She is an author and editor of numerous journals, articles, handbooks, chapters, and 10 books and special journal issues. Her research addresses ecological focus, supports for learning that include broad ecological focus with attention to language and literacy, and African American youth. Her career spanned 55 years, including work as an ELA teacher at the high school and community college levels, a primary grade teacher, and a university professor. She is a founder of 4 African Center schools that span a 49-year history, including the charter schools under the umbrella of Betty Schwartz, and she serves International Center, and she serves as the chair of the board of directors. Professor Carol Lee, this is a very impressive bio and a very inspiring career. We are privileged and honored to have you with us, and we are looking forward to your keynote address entitled Resilience in the Face of Racism, Implications of Science of Learning and Development for Education. Professor Carol Lee, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I'm going to try to do the screen share
We
now.
cannot hear you.
Hold on. Can you, excuse me, can you hear me now?
We cannot hear you. Professor Carol Lee, we cannot.
Yes, we can. We hear
Yes,
you.
we can hear you.
We can hear.
We can hear you fine. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right.
יש פה מישהו שיכול לעזור לנו?
You can hear me now, correct?
Yeah, we can hear
Yeah,
you.
we can hear her.
Okay, wonderful. Well, first, let me thank you very much for this invitation. I'm honored to be here on this very important occasion and the focus of this conference. I've seen a slight change in the title of the presentation, Navigating Difference, Informed by the Sciences of Human Learning and Development. Let's see here. So I think the invitation here came in part from a meeting that we had between the National Academy of Education and the Israeli Academy of Sciences and Humanities around a report that we had developed on educating for civic reasoning and discourse. And the idea, the fundamental proposition in the report was the special role that public education plays. We were looking at this in the context of the United States in preparing young people to engage with the civic dilemmas of our times. And I'm going to draw on that report in terms of what I think are some interesting sort of parallels and connections between issues that we're wrestling with in the United States and ones that you're wrestling with in Israel as well. I think there are a number of interesting parallels between the United States and Israel with regard to educating for civic ends. We both have very contested issues, challenging issues in our history. And part of what we wrestle with is the issue of how do we prepare our young people to sort of understand and navigate these historical challenges that we have faced. Professor Gross shared with me a very interesting article that she had written on the evolution in Israel of how the Ministry of Education addressed the Holocaust of the Second World War. We have interesting wrestlings in the United States around some of the challenges in our own internal history in terms of issues particularly having to do with race. So you think in terms of the what many of us call the African Holocaust of enslavement in the United States, and certainly the challenges with the indigenous population of the country. You may be aware today that there are huge battles going on in the public arena in the United States over how to teach history, particularly with regard to race. This has been sort of focused on the notion of critical race theory in education. Critical race theory is a theory taught in law schools, not taught in K-12 schools, but there's just been a tremendous outpouring and very heated, almost violent sometimes, debates at school board meetings around how to address issues of race and the history of. Among the sort of conundrums is we have, as you do in Israel as a democratic state, where in our Declaration of Independence, the preamble to our Constitution, we have articulated basic goals of the importance of human rights for all people. And yet in the midst of that, the men who signed the document themselves thought that they owned other people in terms of slaves. We've had a long history of challenges around immigration policies. You can see from these images of these anti-immigrant cartoons from the 1890s. These were in the public arena representing a set of beliefs. This was in the midst of the eugenics movement, both in the United States, really in other parts of the world, where at Ellis Island, where immigrants would come in, they would have psychologists there giving these 5-minute IQ tests and would say that, the Jews can't come in because they're morons. The Eastern Europeans can't come in because they're morons. It's a very contentious aspect of our history that's very much in contradiction with the ideals that we've articulated. There certainly has been a history of anti-Semitism in the United States. We even have current challenges, I'm sure you've heard about, in terms of attacks on synagogues. So we're in a very difficult historical moment. And the question before us certainly is, what role in particular does public education play in preparing our young people to wrestle with these contradictions? We also, I think another area of interesting similarity between Israel and the United States is the fact that both countries have great ethnic diversity. There's a tendency in the United States to think about ethnic diversity in terms of pan-ethnic groups, but those categories often don't allow us to see the diversity within groups. So if we think about, for example, the population of peoples of African descent in the United States, we have those such as myself who are descended from the people who were enslaved, but you also have more recent immigrants from the continent of Africa and from the Caribbean. We have much in common, but we also have significant differences. We'll talk in pan-ethnic groups about the indigenous population of the United States, Native American peoples, but again, they also have great heterogeneity in terms of tribal communities and different kinds of relationships that different tribal communities have with the federal government. In Israel, you have certainly ethnic diversity within the Jewish population, and in a similar vein in terms of the Arab populations, I imagine in Israel, I know it's certainly in the United States, is kind of wrestling with the question of how do we, in terms of the nation state, provide opportunities for all people and provide structures that allow us to navigate our differences. In the United States, we have a unique form of governance that is designed essentially to provide multiple pathways for contested sets of interests. So we have structures in terms of the relationships between the federal government, state governments, and local governments. We have in our Constitution and laws issues that are intended to support both the decisions of the majority, the rights of the minority, as well as the rights of the individual. We have processes for amending our constitutions. So after the Civil War, for example, slavery was legally abolished through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And then we have our legislative system of the Supreme Court, federal systems and state systems. So it's a complex form of governance that's essentially organized to create opportunities for dissent, for navigating differences. But in order for young people or adults for that matter to engage with the possibilities of that system, one has to have a deep understanding really of that structure. So what I am hoping to do in the brief time of my remarks here is to suggest that it's important to think about the kind of knowledge and dispositions that are required to engage with the complexities that we face in the civic domain, and that there are lessons that we can learn from the science of human learning and development about how to address it. In the civics report from the National Academy of Education, we've argued that civic reasoning and discourse involves knowledge, both conceptual and procedural knowledge, particularly as they relate to issues in the public domain, involve epistemology, that is a disposition to value complexity and to reject simple solutions for complex problems, that it involves ethics around a grounding around a sense of right and wrong and a sense of appreciation for the common good and for others, and dispositions to listen to others, to value multiple points of view, to consider competing evidence, etc. The question then before us is, what do we know from the sciences of human learning and development that can help us think about how to develop and socialize these dispositions that we've argued are essential to civic reasoning and discourse? Ideas, this we're saying involves a synthesis from a variety of fields of psychology, human development, the learning sciences, and a variety of fields in the neurosciences. One is the idea that the brain is malleable across the lifespan, which suggests that human beings across the lifespan have opportunities and the possibilities of learning new things and developing new beliefs and dispositions. The idea that thinking and feelings and emotions are intricately interconnected, that our decision-making is not simply a matter of sort of cognition and thinking and intellect, but our perceptions are very important, and the emotions that we attribute to experience are important. That for human beings, relationships matter, which means if we're going to get into contested territory, the question of how do we foster and develop relationships are going to matter. I think here Professor Gross's work in bringing together Arab and Jewish students of building relationships that are going to be very important for how we move through difficult decision-making. Prior knowledge is essential to how we learn new things, and that the ability to explore our environment, the physical and social environment, are necessary to develop new knowledge. So then the question becomes, what do these big ideas mean for resilience in the face of trauma? Racism, in whatever form it may take, typically results in multiple communities often experiencing a deep trauma. And thinking about this, I'd like to draw your attention to the work of Dr. Margaret Bill Spencer, the University of Chicago in the United States, who's developed a model that she calls the PVES, Phenomenological Variant of Ecological Systems Theory. In it, she argues, this first box of net vulnerability, she argues that, first she argues that to be human is to be at risk. So sometimes we think about particular populations as experiencing deep risk when others don't, but to be human is to be at risk. And that what counts in terms of vulnerability is not just the objective nature of the risk, but also protective factors that are available. I think often when I talk about this to the experiences of during the Holocaust of the Second World War, people living in these concentration camps who are experiencing risks that we cannot imagine, but at the same time have protective factors with regard to their religious beliefs, the nature of social relationships that are developed. She argues that how we experience our stress is an outcome of the extent to which the resources that are available to us are actually supportive and we perceive them as being important, that the way in which we experience the stresses in our lives and in our communities can result in what she calls reactive coping processes, where in the moment we react, determine that a situation is unsafe and how it is that can become internalized in terms of what she calls emergent identities and lead to specific outcomes, of course, to life. This is a recursive model that evolves as children go from childhood into adolescence into adulthood. It's also important in this work to realize the ways in which children are capable at very young ages of internalizing social values, and that they have a very early commitment, ethical commitment to empathy for others in a sense of right and wrong. The last question then is, what does this imply in terms of pedagogy, in terms of practice? The question that I raise here is, how do we create learning environments, learning opportunities to safely take up the issues of identity that influence our perception of others who we perceive as different? I've heard in the conversations preceding this whole question of perceptions of the other as being central to the challenges that we're talking about. How do our young people come to be able to examine the complex political tensions within our societies currently and historically, as well as those in a larger world context that influence our individual and collective sense of safety? How do we design instruction ways to draw upon repertoires that our students from diverse backgrounds bring to learning new ideas and ways of reasoning? And how do we address inequities in educational outcomes between our majority and minority populations, particularly with regard to ethnicity and class? Okay, where are we? I'm arguing, and I'm not going to really have time to go into this in the level of detail because I know I'm about out of time here now, but I'm suggesting that these are some broad principles for what this means in practice. One, how we situate the complexity of these problems in the civic domain for children to be able to explore, and how do we build practices in our classrooms where kids feel safe in dealing with tensions and with differences, that they're getting feedback around their reasoning processes as they're engaged in this work, and that we're able to connect what we're trying to do to the kinds of repertoires that young people bring from their experiences outside of school. I'm going to offer two quick examples of what I think this can look like in classrooms. One from the study of literature. I would argue that literature provides a powerful opportunity for us to be able to engage in worlds that are different than our own. In the United States, we have a great deal of segregation by race and class. And so kids don't get to interact as much with one another, but you can enter worlds that are. Certainly, the world has had an opportunity to get a small glimpse of what it was like for a teenage girl to try to be a teenager on the one hand and live through the resistance of the fascist regime in Germany through the Diary of Anne Frank. In a similar vein, the novel Beloved by Toni Morrison in the United States captures the sense of the depth of what the enslavement meant when a mother, upon being having escaped slavery, or slave owners who had raped her coming back to try to bring her back into slavery, and in the moment she slits the throat of her baby because that was her gift to the baby, to not have to go back into that, the horror of that enslavement. That literature invites us into the complexities of these worlds that are different than our own. In a similar vein, we can think about opportunities for young people today to study what's going on in Ukraine. And I would argue that, and young people are seeing these images on television of what's unfolding and trying to think about what it means to think about addressing that issue. I'm arguing in this, and I'm sure that they'll be able to make these slides available to you because I suffer from putting a lot of information in that I don't always have time to deal with. But that there's content knowledge that if people don't understand, it's difficult to figure out from the position of a state, how do we weigh in on the horrors of what's going on there? That knowledge has to be understanding of the multi-ethnic communities in Ukraine and their relationships to the Russian state, the history of the devolution of the Soviet Union, the Article 5 of the NATO, agreement, etc. In a similar vein, there's conceptual knowledge around what's going on in Ukraine, understanding how the economic system works. So in the United States, and where we're putting these efforts to sanctions on Europe, understanding how that operates becomes really important. There are ethical dimensions certainly to consider around basic moral values that are going to influence how we think about this, and in the epistemological orientation to really consider the complexities of what's going on there in terms of decisions to go in. I'm closing with this letter that a 6-year-old boy sent to President Obama around the war in Syria. And basically what it reflects, I think, is the fact that very young children have a fundamental grounding in morality and ethics and consideration of the other. Ability to engage our young people in the complexities of our time can have international implications. These are from the Black Lives Matter movement with the killing of George Floyd in the United States that went around the world in terms of people, young people joining in. This fundamental value, this is from South Africa, of Ubuntu, the idea that we're in this world together. So with that, I will just close and look forward to your comments and questions. Sorry, I probably went on a little bit too long.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor Carol Lee, for this groundbreaking and thought-provoking and inspiring address. You have raised some tough issues and tough questions, and I will let our audience to ask questions. So please raise your hands and please write your questions in the chat so that we can conduct this Q&A session. But before, I would like to invite Dr. Sarah Zilderstrom, who is here with us, and she is the head of the special committee that the Minister of Education has established on a life of coexistence. She is doing a fantastic work. And Sarah, would you like, Dr. Sarah Zilderstrom, would you like to comment or say something before we start the Q&A session, please?
Are you sure she's with us?
Okay, I'm not sure. So is there anyone else who would like to ask a question? Perhaps Shelley Shenhav, would you like to ask something? Please, the floor is yours.
I do want, yes, and I'm just writing thank you for Professor Lee for her inspiring lecture, and very emotional also. It's not only academic. What I liked very much about your lecture, that you started with America, United States versus Israel, and you found the similarities, which there are many, also that we are a country of immigrants, but you managed to take it globally and raises current issues that I'm talking with my students nowadays, and it's not so easy to speak about Ukraine. It's very complicated for many reasons. And I found myself last week asking them questions about the refugees and what they think about it, and how they think that Israel should react, because we are also refugees, many of our parents or grandparents, and they didn't answer it. So one student said something and another one, and I really tried, I won't say push them, but push them very easily, softly. And one of them said, it's very complicated. We can't deal with it in the lesson. It's a course about strangeness and otherness, which is a perfect occasion to speak about it. And I think that sometimes I find my the students, not all of them, it depends. It's really complex because, as you know, Israel is a very complex country and answers are very difficult. And sometimes they are, I think, tired to deal with very complex issues, and they don't want to get into them. And you really have to inspire them in order that they will react and will take the challenge to deal with these complex questions. There are not easy answers to these complexities, and they have to face it. And this week, on Sunday, in my lesson, I showed them animation movie that was made in Hungary by an Hungarian artist. It was 6 minutes and 20 something seconds. And the movie was animation about 7 refugees from different countries. Oh my goodness. 2 from Africa, 1 from Mexico,
Sorry,
and 2 others. And
Shelley, we would like to give an opportunity,
I finish.
equal opportunity to other questions. So thank you very much, Shelley. And
they couldn't say a word about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shelley.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Dr. Naomi Beth, please.
Hi, I'm not a doctor, but thank you.
Okay. So you agree.
Hi, my name is Naomi, and I work for ACRI, the Israeli Association for Civil Rights, which is the in coalition with the ACLU. And I have 2 questions, actually. One, and first of all, thank you. It was very interesting to listen to you, so thank you. One was about connecting with this lecture with the previous chair, which was about pedagogic resilience. And I was wondering, what do you think about building individual resilience and building group resilience, since we're talking about doing this in the education system in a classroom? And the second question was about the legitimacy of this discourse in the American education system. What are the barriers for this? Who's for it? Who's against it? That's it.
Thank you very much, Naomi. I would like to ask Dana Friedman also to react or ask a question, please. Dana, the floor is yours.
Do you want me to respond to the earlier question?
Yeah. I will let you speak in a minute.
Okay.
I must tell you that I'm a bit disappointed that no one raised a question about your comparison between the Holocaust and the USA African enslavement, and that would be a very interesting challenge for the Israelis. So I would like to hear also your reaction concerning this very important point and tough question. Please, Professor Carol Lee, the floor is yours.
So part of what I was, well, first this question of individual versus group resilience. Part of what I think we learned from the science of human learning development at this point is that human development is never simply individual. That human development is always intertwined with relationships with others. We don't become resilient simply by ourselves. And it's a complex issue because you have to deal as a parent or as a teacher with both individual variation, but also bringing the resources. And these resources, I would say, for collective or group resilience often have to do with belief systems and forms of social relationship building that have been intergenerational within communities, whether they're ethnic communities or religious communities. And building upon those, I think you can accomplish both individual resilience in light of the resources that the communities that you're a part of bring. In terms of helping young people to deal with the complexity that the first person would ask questions. The example, I didn't get to talk about it in detail because I was trying to rush through the slides, but I'm sure if you all want to share the slides, the details are on there. When I use the case of Ukraine, on the whole, people, the average person, including the average student, is not likely to already have access to all the kinds of information that would help them to think about the real complexity involved in these issues. We are arguing from a pedagogical perspective in terms of how we teach, is that we need to make available to young people all the range of kind of knowledge and contracting issues, et cetera, and ways of thinking about the warrants behind the claims that we make. This issue that most of what we are arguing over really have to do with deep-seated sort of values and beliefs. In the context of the United States, this is deeply contested, has always been deeply contested. It's not new, but it is very, very heated. It's heated to the point where you have members of school boards who are receiving death threats because of decisions that they've made around the teaching around issues about race or about banning books in schools. They often happen in states, often in states in the South. The South in the United States has this interesting legacy as the place of those who sought to dismantle the United States in the Civil War over the question of slavery. So this is sort of issue of how these deep-seated sort of beliefs kind of keep persisting over time, and they keep emerging up, which is why we've argued that public education is so absolutely important in beginning to break these histories of racist kinds of beliefs and practices. But I'm also in the midst hopeful. Those last slides I was showing about the young people who organized against the killing of George Floyd by this police officer in public, right? But the way in which it was picked up around the world, where in all of these places, young people were organizing, saying, this is not right, right? And in doing so, connecting it to local conditions that were happening in their own countries and cities, etc.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Carol Lee. I actually invited you to be our keynote speakers after I heard your lecture and read your important publications, and after our meaningful conversations, I knew that you are the best person in the world to empower us and be a source of inspiration and resilience for us. We need your wisdom, sensitivity, and understanding that in this crucial moment of human history, we need together to establish an international spiritual social movement that takes the values of equality, justice, and tolerance seriously and are ready to do everything for it for the betterment of our world, as we call it in Hebrew, Tikkun Olam. Thank you very much and shalom.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Carolee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing you in other conferences here as well.
Thank you very much.
תודה רבה.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
פרופסור זהבית גרוס,